Have you ever gotten that piece of mail, the kind in a crisp envelope with an official-looking stamp, that just fills you with dread before you even open it? That was me, staring at the envelope from our homeowners association, the one with their ridiculously fancy gold emblem. I knew, deep down, it wasn't going to be good news. The HOA never sent good news. It was always a fine for something petty, a complaint from a neighbor you barely knew, or some new, absurd rule meant to make our lives just a little bit harder. But this time, this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I finally ripped it open, my eyes scanning the words. Effective immediately, it started, your HOA dues will be increased by 500%. I stopped. Read it again. 500%. My mind raced. That wasn't just an increase. It felt like highway robbery disguised in bureaucratic language. The letter went on, mentioning necessary community improvements and threatening penalties, liens, even legal action if we didn't comply. It was unbelievable. Were they serious? How could they possibly justify multiplying our dues by 5 times overnight? My blood started boiling. I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the letter, stormed out of my house, and headed straight for the HOA office. It was this squat, unimpressive little building tucked away at the end of the cul-de-sac, the command center for all the neighborhood's petty tyrannies. I didn't bother knocking. I just pushed the door open hard. And there she was, behind the desk, looking up from her computer with a fake, tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. Gloria Ellsworth, the HOA president, our neighborhood Karen-in-chief. She was a middle-aged woman who seemed to genuinely feed off controlling other people's lives, finding joy in their frustration. That sour look on her face wasn't temporary. It was practically etched in stone. "Ah, Mr. Dawson," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I assume you're here about the dues." "You assume right," I shot back, slamming the letter down on her desk. "What kind of absolute scam are you trying to pull here, Gloria?" She didn't flinch. She just folded her hands primly on the desk, leaning forward slightly like she was explaining something simple to a child. "It's not a scam, Mr. Dawson. It's necessary. The HOA board has decided to make several vital improvements to the neighborhood, and naturally that costs money." "Improvements?" I scoffed, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "Like what? What could possibly cost so much that you need to hike fees by 500%? "New landscaping," she listed, ticking them off mentally. "Repainting the clubhouse, upgrading the pool area." I cut her off right there. "Hold on. I don't use the clubhouse. I haven't set foot in that pool in years. And frankly, I couldn't care less what flowers you decide to plant in the common areas. Why should I be forced to pay an astronomical amount for things I don't use and don't want?" Her fake smile stretched even wider, somehow looking more menacing. "Because, Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "that's how an HOA works. We all contribute to the community. If you don't like the rules or the costs associated with living here, you're always welcome to leave." Leave? I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I'd lived in this house, in this neighborhood, for over 10 years. This was my home. I wasn't about to be bullied out by some power-tripping bureaucrat who clearly enjoyed throwing her weight around. "You can't just do this," I insisted, my voice low and tight. "You can't just raise fees by 500% overnight. That's extortion, plain and simple." She actually chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Oh, but we can," she said sweetly, leaning back in her chair, the picture of smug confidence. "It was voted on and approved by the board." "The board?" I muttered, shaking my head. "Of course. The board consisted of Gloria and her little clique of yes-men, neighbors who probably got special treatment in exchange for blindly backing her every decision. This whole thing stank. This wasn't about community improvement. It felt personal, targeted almost." "This isn't over, Gloria," I said, my voice barely a whisper but filled with conviction. She gave another one of those infuriating little chuckles. "I'm sure it's not." I turned and walked out of that office, my mind racing, anger churning in my gut. I felt helpless for a moment, but that feeling quickly turned into something else: determination. If Gloria and her HOA wanted to play dirty, if they thought they could just rob us blind with a smile, they had severely underestimated me. I wasn't going to roll over. I was going to fight back. And I was going to find out exactly what kind of improvements justified bankrupting the residents. I had a feeling there was more to this story, much more. Walking away from that office, that smug look on Gloria's face burned into my mind. I knew I couldn't just complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. Gloria had the power, or at least she thought she did. If I was going to challenge this insane 500% dues increase, I needed proof. Proof that this wasn't about community improvements, but about something else entirely. Something shady. So I spent the rest of that afternoon, and well into the evening, doing a deep dive into the HOA's financials. As a homeowner, I technically had the right to access the budget reports and records, but let me tell you, they didn't make it easy. It felt like they deliberately buried everything under layers of confusing folders and poorly labeled files on the clunky community website. But I was determined. If Gloria thought she could hide her tracks, she was wrong. I pulled up the budget reports from the last few years, my eyes scanning line after line of income and expenses. At first, it just looked like a lot of numbers, typical bureaucratic spending. But the more I looked, the more inconsistencies started to jump out. Little things at first. Vague charges listed under administrative costs that seemed unusually high and lacked any real detail. Expenses for landscaping that seemed to fluctuate wildly from month to month, without any visible change in the neighborhood's appearance. Then I found it. A recurring payment, quite a substantial one, listed month after month, going to a company called Ellsworth Property Management. Ellsworth. The name immediately set off alarm bells. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? A quick search online confirmed my suspicions almost instantly. Ellsworth Property Management was registered to none other than Gloria's nephew. A cold chuckle escaped my lips. There it was, clear as day. Our esteemed HOA president, the one demanding a 500% increase for necessary improvements, had been funneling HOA funds directly into her own family's business. Nepotism. Corruption. It was exactly the kind of grubby self-dealing I had started to suspect. This wasn't just incompetence, it was deliberate deception. She was using our money to enrich her own relatives. Discovering the fraud felt like a small victory, but just exposing her wasn't enough. Knowing Gloria, she'd probably try to spin it, maybe claim it was all above board, approved by her cronies on the board. I wanted more. I wanted her to feel the consequences immediately. I wanted to disrupt the power she held so tightly. And as I sat there, staring at the proof of her deceit, an idea began to form. A deliciously disruptive idea. I started making some calls. I have a few friends, people I've known for years, who work in different sectors, city planning, utilities. I explained the situation vaguely, focusing on potential financial irregularities within a local organization's account management. After a bit of back and forth, piecing together information about how commercial utility accounts were managed, I found exactly the loophole I was looking for. It turned out the HOA office, that little squat building where Gloria held court, wasn't on the same power grid as the rest of our residential houses. It was classified differently, tied to its own commercial account. And here was the kicker. According to city regulations and the power company's policies, if a formal review of a commercial account was requested due to suspected financial irregularities, like, say, evidence of fraudulent transfers or mismanagement of funds, it could trigger an automatic, temporary suspension of service. The power company wouldn't ask too many questions initially. They just cut the power until the flagged financial issues were investigated and resolved by the account holder. A slow grin spread across my face. This was perfect. It wasn't about sabotage. It was about using their own system, their own rules against them. Based on the evidence I'd already found, the payments to her nephew's company, I had more than enough justification to flag the account for irregularities. That evening, armed with the evidence of the payments to Ellsworth Property Management, I carefully drafted and submitted the formal request for a review of the HOA's commercial power account, citing potential financial misconduct and unauthorized fund transfers. I hit send, feeling a surge of adrenaline mixed with righteous satisfaction. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait and see if Gloria walked into it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, a nervous energy buzzing inside me. I couldn't resist. I had to see it for myself. I drove slowly towards the end of the cul-de-sac, towards that little HOA office building. As I rounded the corner, my heart leaped. It was dark, completely dark. No lights filtering through the windows, no hum of the air conditioning unit that usually droned on relentlessly. It had worked. The power was cut. And sure enough, standing outside on the sidewalk, looking utterly bewildered, were Gloria and a couple of her board member cronies. They were staring at the darkened windows, then at each other, confusion rapidly morphing into visible frustration. Gloria had her phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising as she clearly barked orders at someone on the other end, probably the power company. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. They weren't going to just flip a switch. Not until the financial irregularities I had reported were addressed, and clearing that up, especially with the evidence I had, could take days, maybe even weeks. I parked my car across the street, partially hidden by a tree, and just watched. It was immensely satisfying seeing Gloria, the woman who held so much power over our daily lives, reduced to packing frantically on a sidewalk outside her now useless office. No computers meant no access to files, no sending out fine notices, no processing payments, no air conditioning on what was shaping up to be a warm day. They were completely dead in the water. Word travels fast in a neighborhood, especially when something unusual is happening. Soon, other residents started emerging from their homes, drawn by the sight of the HOA president and her allies looking increasingly panicked outside the dark office. Murmurs started rippling through the small crowd that was beginning to gather. What's going on? Did they forget to pay the bill? Is the HOA shut down? A few homeowners, people I knew had also been frustrated with Gloria's reign, approached me as I got out of my car. They asked if I knew anything. At first, I played dumb, just shrugging and saying I saw the commotion. But as I looked at their faces, saw the years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface, saw the flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, Gloria wasn't invincible, I knew it was time. This was the moment. I casually walked back to my car and pulled out my laptop. I also had printed copies of the key financial documents I'd found, the budget inconsistencies, and especially the records showing the payments to Ellsworth Property Management. Actually, I said, loud enough for several people to hear, I think I might know why the power's off. You might want to see this. I opened the laptop and showed them the digital files, handing out the printed copies of the payments to Gloria's nephew. I explained what I'd found, the funneling of funds, the ridiculously high administrative costs, connecting it all back to the outrageous 500% dues increase they just tried to impose. You could have heard a pin drop for a second, followed by gasps echoing through the crowd. People started passing the papers around, pointing, whispering, their confusion turning into visible anger. Looks were exchanged, nods of understanding, faces hardening with indignation. All those unexplained fees, the arbitrary fines, the feeling that something wasn't right, it all suddenly clicked into place for them. Gloria must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the way the crowd's energy turned from curiosity to hostility. Her face flushed a deep red. She stormed over towards me, her eyes blazing. "Did you have something to do with this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the darkened building. "What are you showing people?" Instead of answering her directly, I simply held out another printed copy of her nephew's company payments. My voice was calm, steady. "Maybe you should take a look at your own records, Gloria." She snatched the papers from my hand, her eyes scanning them rapidly. I watched her expression change. The anger flickered, replaced by something else, something that looked unmistakably like fear. Raw, unadulterated panic started to creep into her eyes. She shuffled the papers, looked back at the angry faces surrounding her, then back at the documents. She had been caught, red-handed, and she knew it. The homeowners around us weren't just murmuring anymore. They were furious. Voices started rising. "This is fraud," someone yelled. "She's been stealing from us," shouted another. Someone else, a resident I recognized as being particularly knowledgeable about the HOA bylaws, suddenly suggested calling for an emergency vote to remove Gloria and the entire board immediately. Others chimed in, demanding a full external audit of every penny the HOA had spent for the past 5 years. Honestly, seeing her panic after everything she put us through, it felt good, but the real fight was just beginning. If you were in my shoes, seeing the neighbors finally ready to act, what would you have done next? Let me know in the comments below. And just like that, standing there in the morning heat outside her powerless office, the iron grip Gloria had held over our neighborhood for years began to visibly crumble. The very people she had dismissed, fined, and exploited were now staring her down, armed with the truth. I leaned back against my car, a deep sense of satisfaction settling in my chest as I watched the chaos unfold. She thought she could bleed us dry without consequence. She was finally realizing just how wrong she was. Her reign was coming to an end. Seeing Gloria cornered, stripped of her usual smug confidence and facing a crowd that was no longer intimidated, felt like a turning point. The air crackled with newfound energy. People who had grumbled privately for years were now speaking up, their voices joining a growing chorus demanding change. It wasn't just about the power outage anymore. It was about years of frustration, unfair fines, and Gloria's dictatorial rule finally boiling over. Gloria, sensing her control slipping away like sand through her fingers, desperately tried to regain command. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, now had a desperate edge. She waved the financial papers I'd given her, insisting they were being misinterpreted, that the payments to her nephew's company were completely legitimate business expenses, somehow vital for the community's upkeep. She tried to dismiss the crowd's anger, telling people that if they had concerns, they needed to follow protocol, schedule appointments, and discuss things privately, one by one. Basically, she wanted to divide and conquer, just like she always had. But it was too late for that. Nobody was buying it. That was her final mistake. Trying to shut down the conversation just fueled the fire. A man named Bill, a retired contractor who lived down the street and wasn't easily intimidated, stepped forward. Bill had a commanding presence, honed by years of dealing with difficult clients and managing crews. His voice cut through Gloria's sputtering defenses. He calmly reminded everyone, citing the specific HOA bylaws, the very rules Gloria loved to weaponize against us, that homeowners had the absolute right to call for an immediate, emergency vote to remove the board if there was sufficient evidence of financial mismanagement or misconduct. He held up a copy of the bylaws, pointing to the exact clause. Suddenly, the vague anger solidified into a concrete plan. Hope flared in people's eyes, quickly replaced by determined resolve. Someone produced a clipboard seemingly out of nowhere, along with a stack of blank petition forms. The call went out. Signatures were needed to formally trigger the special election allowed by the bylaws Bill had just cited. Gloria's face went pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked from face to face, searching for any sign of support, but found only stern, determined expressions. Her little empire was visibly crumbling right in front of her eyes. Then Angela, a woman who had lived in the neighborhood longer than almost anyone and had seen countless examples of the HOA's overreach, spoke up. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of years of observation. She didn't shout. She simply reminded everyone of the specific instances. The elderly couple threatened with foreclosure over a slightly overgrown shrub. The single mom harassed constantly because her child left a bicycle in the driveway overnight. The veterans told they couldn't fly the American flag outside of designated holidays. Story after story tumbled out, painting a clear picture of Gloria's petty tyranny. More voices joined in, sharing their own grievances. building a powerful, undeniable case against her leadership. Gloria took an involuntary step back. Her carefully constructed mask of authority was shattering. She tried to argue, to sputter about irrationality and procedures, but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. People were lining up to sign the petition Bill was holding, their movements quick, decisive. The clipboard filled with signatures faster than I could have imagined. The momentum was overwhelming. It felt unstoppable. Just then, a calm, professional voice cut through the commotion. A man I hadn't seen before, dressed sharply in business casual and carrying a briefcase, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He introduced himself as an attorney specializing in HOA litigation. Apparently, one of the homeowners, suspecting things might get legally complicated, had invited him to observe. He calmly explained that, given the clear evidence of financial misconduct already circulating, the board members, especially Gloria, could be facing serious legal consequences far beyond just being removed from their positions. He mentioned potential civil lawsuits to recover the misused funds, and depending on the extent of the corruption uncovered by an audit, even the possibility of dissolving the HOA entirely. He even hinted at potential criminal charges if fraud was definitively proven. That sent a fresh wave of shock, mixed with a sense of vindicated fury, through the crowd. Gloria looked like she might faint. Her fingers clenched the financial papers as if they were the only things holding her upright. She stammered something about needing to consult her own legal counsel, but her words were lost in the determined buzz of the homeowners. We weren't waiting for her permission. The power had shifted. Using the emergency provisions Bill had pointed out in the bylaws, a vote was officially scheduled for that very evening, right there in the neighborhood park near the still-darkened HOA office. Volunteers immediately fanned out, knocking on doors, sending texts and emails, ensuring every single resident knew what was happening and knew that their voice, finally, could make a difference. The reign of Gloria Ellsworth was about to face its final judgment. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawns, the neighborhood gathered in the park. There was a palpable buzz in the air, a mix of nervousness, anticipation, and determination. People brought lawn chairs, blankets, even coolers. It felt less like a tense HOA meeting and more like a community reclaiming its space. A simple folding table had been set up under a large tree, manned by volunteers including Bill and Angela, with makeshift ballots ready. One by one, residents lined up, verified their addresses, and cast their votes. Gloria and her few remaining loyal board members stood off to the side, near the darkened, powerless HOA office that now seemed like a monument to her failure. They looked isolated, defeated. Gloria watched the proceedings with a blank, stony expression, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her composure. All the intimidation tactics, the bureaucratic maneuvering, the carefully cultivated power, none of it mattered now. The decision rested solely with the homeowners she had alienated for so long. The voting didn't take long. The turnout was massive. When the last ballot was cast, the volunteers carefully counted them right there in the open, with several residents observing to ensure transparency. A hush fell over the crowd as Angela stepped forward to announce the results. Her voice was clear and strong as she read the outcome. An overwhelming, landslide vote to remove Gloria Ellsworth and the entire existing HOA board, effective immediately. For a split second, there was silence. Then, a cheer erupted. It started small, then swelled into a wave of applause, relieved laughter, and shouts of joy. People clapped each other on the back, shook hands, hugged their neighbors. Years of simmering resentment and frustration seemed to evaporate in that moment, replaced by a powerful sense of unity and shared relief. It felt like the whole neighborhood took a collective deep breath for the first time in years. The relief was incredible. Have you ever felt that kind of collective victory where a whole group stands up together? Share your thoughts in the comments. Gloria didn't wait for any formal dismissal or further discussion. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, her shoulders hunched, her face an unreadable mask, and walked away towards her house. Her cronies quickly dispersed, melting back into the neighborhood, their brief moment of power extinguished. No one tried to stop her, no one shouted insults. Her silent retreat was perhaps the most telling sign that her reign was truly over. In the days immediately following the vote, an interim committee, led by Bill and Angela, was quickly formed by volunteers. Their first act was hiring a locksmith to change the locks on the HOA office. They began the painstaking process of securing all the records, or what was left of them, and coordinating with the attorney who had advised us. An official, external audit was launched immediately to uncover the full extent of the financial damage Gloria had inflicted. The attorney also helped us file the necessary paperwork for a lawsuit against Gloria and the ousted board members, seeking to recover the funds that rightfully belonged to the community. The nightmare was over, but the cleanup was just beginning. Still, standing there in the park, surrounded by celebrating neighbors, I felt an immense sense of satisfaction. We had done it. We had taken back our neighborhood. With Gloria gone and the old HOA board dismantled, the neighborhood transformed almost overnight. It wasn't just the absence of threatening letters or nitpicking fines. It was the atmosphere. The tension was gone, replaced by a sense of collaboration and possibility. People started talking to each other more, sharing tools, helping with yard work, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The audit, as expected, uncovered a deeper cesspool of corruption than we had initially realized. It wasn't just the payments to her nephew's shell company. Gloria had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, inflating invoices for services never rendered, neglecting essential maintenance while claiming funds were spent, and even taking out a secret loan against the HOA's assets that none of us knew about. The paper trail was damning, showing years of systematic embezzlement and fraud. Armed with the audit results, the lawsuit against Gloria and her complicit board members moved forward swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. The attorney skillfully presented the case, detailing breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and embezzlement. Facing incontrovertible proof and mounting legal fees, Gloria's defense crumbled. The court eventually ordered her to pay significant restitution. To cover part of it, her assets were frozen, and ultimately, the court seized her house, the very symbol of her status in the neighborhood. Seeing her forced to sell the house she lorded over us from felt like true poetic justice. Her nephew's sham property management company was also exposed and dissolved, facing its own legal troubles. Under pressure, he ended up cooperating with the investigation, providing testimony that further sealed Gloria's fate. The last I heard, she was facing serious financial ruin and potential criminal charges. She eventually moved out of the neighborhood under the shadow of disgrace. A few of us watched her load the last of her belongings into a car. There were no tearful goodbyes, just the quiet satisfaction of a community finally free from her grip. What happened to her house was perhaps the best part of the aftermath. Instead of it being flipped for profit, the interim committee worked with the attorney and the court to facilitate its sale to a local nonprofit organization that helps veterans and low-income families find affordable housing. They renovated it, removing the overly ornate touches Gloria had added, and soon a young family who had been struggling to afford a home in the area moved in. Seeing their kids playing in the yard, free from the fear of violating some arbitrary HOA rule, felt like the final victory. With the lawsuit concluded and the stolen funds partially recovered, the neighborhood faced a choice: reinstate a new HOA or try something different. Overwhelmingly, we chose freedom. We decided against forming another formal HOA. Instead, we established a simple, voluntary neighborhood watch and a small, optional fund for essential shared maintenance like the park upkeep, managed with complete transparency by a rotating committee. The old clubhouse, once a symbol of Gloria's control, became a genuine community center, open for gatherings and events, managed collectively. People started painting their houses the colors they liked, planting diverse gardens, putting up basketball hoops, and flying flags whenever they pleased. The neighborhood didn't descend into chaos as Gloria likely would have predicted. Instead, it flourished. Pride in ownership returned, driven by personal choice, not by fear of fines. Looking back now, the whole ordeal started with a single, outrageous letter demanding a 500% increase. It sparked anger, then investigation, and finally collective action. We learned that one person's greed and thirst for power can cause immense frustration, but we also learned that a community, united and determined, can fight back and win. Standing on my porch today, watching kids ride bikes freely down the street and neighbors chatting easily over fences, I know we did the right thing. We didn't just get rid of a Karen HOA president. We reclaimed our homes and our freedom, and we would never let anyone rule over us like that again. And that's my story of how our neighborhood took on a tyrannical HOA Karen and won. It was a stressful, infuriating ordeal, but seeing our community come together and stand up for what was right made it all worthwhile. We proved that people can manage their own affairs with cooperation and respect, without needing someone wielding arbitrary power over them. If you enjoyed this story or have faced your own battles with difficult HOAs or neighbors, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes you have to fight for your peace and quiet. See you in the next video.